It was just another typical day, or so I thought. I was out of town, visiting a client in Phoenix. The meeting had gone well, and I was wrapping up some paperwork in the quiet of the conference room when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Vanessa's name. I didn't think much of it, just the usual check-in, I assumed. Maybe she was wondering how long I'd be or if I'd remembered to pick up something on my way back. I stepped out into the hallway, answering with a casual, "Hey, what's up?" That's when her voice hit me, cold, almost smug. There was no preamble, no pleasantries. Just, "Lucas, I'm divorcing you." "Oh, and I've already sold our apartment. Jordan and I are moving in together. Good luck finding a new place." She ended it with a laugh, as if it were the punchline to some cruel joke. For a moment, the world tilted. It was like hearing someone talk about your life as though you weren't in the room. Divorce? Jordan? Sold the apartment? Her words came fast and sharp, each one more jarring than the last. But in that split second, I knew one thing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I forced my voice to stay calm, my tone as neutral as I could make it. "Sounds good," I replied, as if she'd just told me she'd switched brands of coffee. Her silence on the other end was brief, but I knew it was there. She'd expected outrage, maybe even a pleading response. Instead, I gave her indifference. Inside, though, it wasn't indifference. Inside was a storm, a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. 6 years of marriage, and this was how it ended? Over a phone call? Her voice, filled with casual entitlement, kept playing in my mind. "Jordan and I are moving in together." Jordan, the boyfriend I didn't know existed until 5 seconds ago. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer, and now she had the audacity to laugh about it? But what hit me the hardest was the apartment. Our apartment. It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was everything we'd worked for together. Every inch of that place held memories of late-night talks, arguments, laughter, and dreams. And now she'd sold it, just like that, without even telling me. I took a deep breath, my hand tightening around the phone. She wasn't done yet. "You probably think you're going to fight this, Lucas," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But it's done. The paperwork's signed, and Jordan and I are moving on. Maybe you should too." "Got it," I said simply, still refusing to give her what she wanted. I hung up before she could say anything else. Standing there in the hallway, the weight of what had just happened began to settle. My wife had not only decided to leave me, but she'd also orchestrated it with such calculation that I almost had to admire the nerve. Almost. But admiration was far from what I felt. What I did feel, though, was resolve. She thought she'd outsmarted me, thought she held all the cards. But Vanessa didn't know everything. She didn't know about the quiet move I'd made months ago when we refinanced the apartment. She didn't know the deed was solely in my name. And that was her first mistake. I returned to the conference room, sat back down, and stared blankly at the paperwork in front of me. My mind wasn't on the client anymore. It was back home, in that apartment I now knew she and Jordan were planning to claim as their love nest. The betrayal stung, but beneath it, something else was brewing: determination. I wouldn't let her take everything from me. I wouldn't let her laugh her way into a new life while I scrambled to piece mine back together. No, Vanessa didn't realize it yet, but she just handed me the upper hand. As the rest of the meeting dragged on, I kept a poker face, nodding at the right moments and offering polite responses. But my mind was elsewhere, plotting, preparing. By the time I left the building, I wasn't the same man who had answered that phone call. I was ready to fight. Ready to show Vanessa and Jordan exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's been paying attention all along. The flight home couldn't come soon enough. The plane ride home was uneventful, but my mind was anything but calm. Vanessa's words kept replaying in my head, each syllable a hammer against the walls of our history. The betrayal was bad enough, but the sheer arrogance of her move, selling the apartment, the one thing that had been our shared dream, our first major milestone as a couple, without a second thought, it was like she'd erased me from her life with the stroke of a pen. But here's the thing about Vanessa. She never read the fine print. She was always the type to skim through agreements, signing her name with that same air of confidence she wore like a badge. She left the details to me, trusting that I'd figure it all out. Funny, isn't it? The very habit that had frustrated me for years was now my saving grace. Months ago, when we refinanced the apartment for a lower interest rate, I made a decision. A quiet, calculated move. At the time, it seemed practical. With the new terms, it made sense to transfer the deed into my name alone. I didn't even think twice about it. It was just one of those things you do to streamline the paperwork. Vanessa hadn't objected. In fact, she'd barely looked at the documents before signing them. I hadn't mentioned it since because, honestly, why would I? It wasn't a secret, just a detail that didn't come up. Until now, Vanessa's arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. She thought she could sell the apartment and walk away with the money, leaving me in the dust. But she didn't realize that the deed, the one legal document that decided ownership, had my name on it and mine alone. As I sat on that plane, staring at the clouds outside the window, I couldn't help but smile. She'd sold something that wasn't hers to sell. And while I was furious at her betrayal, there was a sense of satisfaction in knowing I held the upper hand. When I landed and turned my phone back on, I had no messages from Vanessa. No smug follow-ups, no taunts. She probably assumed I was too busy wallowing in self-pity to respond. Little did she know, I was gearing up for the fight of my life. My first call wasn't to her. It was to Chloe, my lawyer and an old college friend. I'd helped her move into her first apartment years ago, and she'd always joked that I'd get the family discount if I ever needed her services. Now, it seemed, it was time to cash in. "Lucas," Chloe said when she picked up. "What's going on? You don't usually call me during work hours." I explained everything. The phone call, the apartment, Jordan, and Vanessa's delusions of grandeur. By the time I finished, Chloe was silent for a moment, and then she laughed. A sharp, incredulous laugh. "She sold the apartment?" she repeated. "Lucas, does she even know she can't legally do that?" "Apparently not," I said, the faintest hint of amusement in my voice. "Well," Chloe said, her tone turning serious, "this is going to be interesting. First, we'll need to notify the buyer that the sale is void. If Vanessa's already taken their money, that could open up a whole new can of worms. Fraud charges, for starters." The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. Vanessa thought she was so clever, pulling the rug out from under me. But in her rush to start her new life, she'd overlooked one critical detail. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "For now, gather everything, emails, documents, anything related to the refinancing and the deed," Chloe said. "I'll handle the legal side. But Lucas, if she's already bragging about this to you, she's probably told other people too. She's digging her own grave, and we just need to give her a push." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in days. The betrayal still stung, but knowing that Vanessa's scheme was unraveling gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since that phone call. When I got home that evening, I didn't waste time. I pulled out the deed, the refinancing paperwork, and every email exchange related to the apartment. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, a reminder that Vanessa's carelessness would be her undoing. I placed the documents in a neat stack on the dining table, then sat back and stared at them. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about showing Vanessa that I wasn't the pushover she'd assumed I was. She thought she'd won. She thought she could walk away with everything, laughing at my expense. But Vanessa had underestimated me, and soon enough, she'd realized just how big of a mistake that was. The drive back to the apartment was surreal. I'd spent the entire flight planning out what I'd say, how I'd handle the confrontation. Vanessa had no idea what was coming, and that thought gave me a strange sense of calm. For once, the scales weren't tipped in her favor. The moment I walked through the door, I could feel it. The apartment was different. Her presence was heavy in the air, but not in the familiar way. No, this was different. It was like she'd claimed the space as her own, as if my existence within these walls was already erased. Her voice reached me before her face did. She was in the living room, chatting animatedly with someone. I turned the corner and stopped in my tracks. There she was, standing next to a man I could only assume was Jordan. He was younger than I expected, tall and smug, with the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've won a prize. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it back on. "Oh, Lucas, you're back," she said, her tone dripping with false cheer. Jordan looked over, and I swear he smirked. He actually smirked, as if I were some minor inconvenience in his new life. "I didn't realize you'd be home so soon," Vanessa continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Jordan and I were just discussing some plans for the apartment." Plans? For my apartment? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I just stepped further into the room, set my bag down, and looked at them both. "Vanessa," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Her smile wavered. "Lucas, can it wait? We're kind of in the middle of something." "No," I said, crossing my arms. "It can't." Jordan glanced at her, then back at me. "Look, man," he said, his tone patronizing. "I get that this is hard for you, but Vanessa and I—" "This doesn't concern you," I cut in, my eyes never leaving Vanessa's. The room went quiet. Vanessa's confident demeanor began to crack as I pulled out the deed from my bag. I held it up, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's the deed to this apartment," I said, my tone steady. "The one that's in my name. Only my name." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, remember?" I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "So no, Vanessa, you didn't sell this apartment. You can't sell something you don't own." Jordan's smirk vanished. He turned to her, confusion and irritation written all over his face. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Of course not," she snapped, though her voice wavered. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "You're lying." I didn't bother arguing. I simply set the deed on the coffee table in front of them. Jordan picked it up, scanning the document. His expression darkened as he realized the truth. "Vanessa," he said slowly, "what is this?" She sputtered, her confidence unraveling. It's nothing. He's just trying to scare us." I let out a dry laugh. "Scare you? Vanessa, I'm just getting started. The sale you made? Void. The money you've taken? If you've spent a single cent of it, you're looking at fraud charges." Her face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I countered, stepping closer. "Go ahead. Call your buyer. See how they feel about being scammed." Jordan stepped back, holding up his hands. Whoa. Fraud? Scammed? I didn't sign up for this." He looked at Vanessa, his tone turning accusatory. "You said this place was yours, that you'd already sold it." "It is," she insisted, her voice growing desperate. "I mean, it was supposed to be." Jordan shook his head, taking another step back. "I'm not getting involved in this mess," he muttered. I crossed my arms, watching the cracks spread in their little fantasy. "So," I said, addressing them both, "here's how this is going to work. Vanessa, you're going to pack your things and leave. You too, Jordan. You have no right to be here, and I'm done playing nice." "You can't do this," Vanessa hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "This is our home." "No," I said firmly. "This is my home, and you're not welcome in it anymore." Jordan didn't need any more convincing. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, throwing one last look at Vanessa. "Good luck," he said coldly before walking out. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You're going to regret this," she spat. I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret it." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For the first time in days, the apartment felt like mine again. And it was just the beginning. Jordan's departure had been satisfying, but I knew the chaos wasn't over. Vanessa, as predictable as ever, wasn't someone who would simply slink away in silence. Still, I couldn't help but relish the look on Jordan's face when he'd finally pieced it all together. His smug confidence crumbling into confusion and irritation as he realized the tangled mess Vanessa had dragged him into. It wasn't just the fraud that had shaken him. It was the betrayal. He had believed her, trusted her when she said the apartment was hers to sell, that their new life together was built on solid ground. Watching him crumble under the weight of her lies was almost poetic. But let's rewind for a moment. When Jordan first showed up with Vanessa, he carried himself like he owned the place. His every glance and gesture radiated arrogance, like a man confident he'd won the jackpot. I'd seen men like him before, the ones who mistake audacity for power, who think they've outsmarted the world when, in reality, they're standing on quicksand. When I revealed the truth about the deed, his transformation was immediate. It started small, a flicker of doubt in his eyes as he scanned the document I'd placed on the coffee table. I watched him read it, his lips tightening with each line. By the time he looked up, the confidence was gone, replaced by something far more satisfying. Panic. "Vanessa," he had said, his voice low and strained. "What is this?" Vanessa, true to form, had tried to bluff her way out of it. "It's nothing, Jordan. He's just trying to mess with us. Don't fall for it." But Jordan wasn't buying it. Not anymore. He wasn't the sharpest guy, but even he could connect the dots. The legal jargon in the deed, my calm and unwavering demeanor, Vanessa's growing desperation. It all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. "You told me this place was yours," he said, his voice rising. "You said you'd already sold it. Was that a lie too?" Vanessa shot me a venomous glare, as if this were somehow my fault. "It wasn't a lie," she snapped at him, though her voice wavered. I didn't know about the deed being in his name, okay? It's a technicality." "A technicality?" Jordan scoffed, holding up the deed. "This says he owns the apartment outright. That's not a technicality, Vanessa. That's fraud." The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Vanessa's face paled, her bravado crumbling. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "You planned this, didn't you? You knew I'd try to sell it, and you just sat there, waiting to humiliate me." I raised an eyebrow. "You gave me far too much credit." "I didn't plan anything, Vanessa. You did this all on your own." Jordan's frustration boiled over. "You didn't tell me any of this, Vanessa. You said you had everything under control. Do you even realize what kind of position this puts me in? I can't be involved in something like this." "You're not involved," Vanessa snapped, her voice shrill. "This is between me and Lucas." "Really?" He shot back. "Because I'm standing in the middle of his apartment, holding a deed that says I have no business being here. Sounds pretty involved to me." I couldn't help but interject. "He's not wrong, Vanessa. Fraud charges don't look good on anyone's record. And if you've already taken money from the buyer, well, let's just say this situation isn't going to end the way you think it will." Jordan ran a hand through his hair, visibly grappling with the realization that his perfect new life was unraveling before it even began. "I'm out," he said abruptly, stepping away from Vanessa. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean, you're out?" "I mean I'm done," he said, his tone sharp. "This isn't what I signed up for. You lied to me, and now you're dragging me into your mess. Figure it out on your own." With that, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Vanessa scrambled after him, her voice pleading. "Jordan, wait. Don't go. We can fix this. Just give me a chance to." He didn't even look back. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving her standing there, stunned. For a moment, I thought she might actually cry. She turned back to me, her face a mixture of rage and despair. "Are you happy now?" she spat. "You've ruined everything." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I didn't ruin anything, Vanessa. You did that all on your own. You lied, you schemed, and now you're facing the consequences. Maybe it's time you start taking responsibility for your actions." Her anger flared, but she didn't have a response. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her throwing things around, muttering under her breath. As I stood there, the silence after Jordan's departure was almost peaceful. Watching him realize the truth and walk away was the cherry on top of an already satisfying confrontation. Vanessa had overplayed her hand, and now she was left to pick up the pieces, alone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was truly in control. The game wasn't over, but the tide had definitely turned in my favor. Vanessa's anger could have powered a small city that night. I could hear her pacing in the bedroom, tossing her things around and muttering curses under her breath. The sound of hangers clattering to the floor and the occasional thud of her suitcase hitting the bed didn't bother me. I just sat in the living room, enjoying the silence between her outbursts. I'd already won this round, and we both knew it. Jordan's dramatic exit had left her reeling, and for the first time since she'd made that smug phone call, Vanessa wasn't in control. It was my turn now, and she hated every second of it. She burst out of the bedroom after what felt like an hour, her face flushed and her expression twisted with frustration. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms. "Won? Vanessa, this isn't a game. This is my life. You're the one who decided to turn it into a circus." She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please, don't act like some innocent victim here. You knew about the deed. You planned this. You've been waiting for a moment like this to rub it in my face." I shrugged, refusing to take the bait. "You didn't care about the details, Vanessa. You never have. I didn't need to plan anything because your arrogance did all the work for me. You signed the paperwork without even reading it. That's not on me, that's on you." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for a moment, I thought she might actually scream. But instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "Fine," she said, her tone dripping with venom. "You've made your point. Congratulations. What do you want, Lucas? Do you want me to beg? Is that it?" I raised an eyebrow. "Beg? No, Vanessa. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to leave. You and your grand plans for this apartment can find somewhere else to play house." Her face twisted with fury, but there was something else beneath it. Panic. Real panic. She had underestimated me, and now she was grasping at straws. "You can't just kick me out," she said, her voice trembling. "I have nowhere to go." "Then I suggest you start figuring it out," I replied, my tone calm but firm, "because this is my home, and you're no longer welcome here." She stared at me, her lips trembling as she tried to come up with a response. Finally, she let out a frustrated growl and stormed back into the bedroom. Moments later, she emerged with a suitcase in tow. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. I stood, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. "No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret this. You thought you could sell this apartment, take the money, and waltz off into the sunset with Jordan. Now look at you. No apartment, no money, and no boyfriend." She flinched at my words, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hands tightening around the handle of her suitcase. "I'll give you a few days to figure out where you're going," I continued. "But make no mistake, you're leaving. And the sooner, the better." Her eyes burned with fury, but she didn't argue. She turned on her heel and dragged her suitcase out the door, slamming it behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. Vanessa's panic had been palpable, her desperation like a weight hanging in the air. But now, she was gone, and the apartment, my apartment, felt lighter without her. I knew this wasn't the end. Vanessa wasn't the type to give up so easily, and I fully expected her to try something else. But for now, I'd won. And that was enough. As I sat back on the couch, I allowed myself a small smile. She thought she could bulldoze her way through my life, but she hadn't counted on one thing. Me. I wasn't the naive, trusting husband she thought I was. I was done being her pawn. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was finally free. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, after Vanessa left. Her absence was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in weeks, the tension that had been hanging over me like a storm cloud began to lift. I stood in the living room, looking around at the remnants of a life we'd built together. It was strange, how something that once felt so permanent could now feel so foreign. But I wasn't one to dwell on the past. Vanessa had underestimated me, and I wasn't about to waste this opportunity to take full control of my life. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home. It was about reclaiming myself. The first thing I did was pack up her things. I didn't want her energy, her entitlement, or her lies lingering in my space any longer. I grabbed a few empty boxes from the closet and started sorting through her belongings. The process was oddly therapeutic. Each item I placed in the box felt like shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Her shoes, tossed carelessly by the door, boxed. Her collection of designer handbags, boxed. The framed photos she insisted on hanging in the hallway, even though I hated them, down they came. I didn't break or damage anything, not because I was feeling generous, but because I wanted to do this with dignity. Vanessa had brought enough chaos into my life. I didn't need to stoop to her level. Once I'd cleared her things, the apartment already felt different. The clutter, both physical and emotional, was gone. It was just me now, in a space that was finally my own. Next, I called Chloe. She'd been my rock through this entire ordeal, and I knew she'd have the next steps ready. "How's it going over there?" she asked, her tone both professional and sympathetic. "Quiet," I replied. "Vanessa's gone. For now, at least." "Good," Chloe said. "Let's keep it that way. I've already notified the buyer about the voided sale, and they're not happy with Vanessa. They're fully cooperating with us, which makes this much easier." "What about Vanessa?" I asked. "She's in a tight spot," Chloe said with a hint of satisfaction. "If she's already spent any of the deposit money, that's on her. And if she tries to push back, we'll move forward with fraud charges." The word fraud still sent a satisfying chill down my spine. Vanessa had always believed she was untouchable, that she could manipulate and bulldoze her way through any situation. Now, she was finally learning the hard way that actions have consequences. "Do we need to do anything else right now?" I asked. "For now, just hold your ground," Chloe said. "Make it clear that the apartment is yours and that you won't tolerate any more nonsense from her. I'll handle the legal side of things, and we'll move forward with the divorce paperwork soon." I thanked her and hung up, feeling more grounded than I had in weeks. Chloe was right. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let Vanessa or anyone else take that away from me. With that in mind, I started reclaiming the space. The oversized gaming chair Vanessa had hated, I dragged it out of the corner and placed it by the window, where I could sit and enjoy the view. The minimalist artwork I'd always loved but she dismissed as boring, back on the walls. I even rearranged the furniture, shifting everything to reflect my tastes rather than hers. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about making the apartment feel like mine again. By the time I was done, the space looked and felt entirely different. It was cleaner, brighter, more personal. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was my sanctuary, my starting point for the next chapter of my life. Later that evening, my best friend Ethan came over with a bottle of bourbon. He took one look around and let out a low whistle. "Wow," he said, sinking into the couch. "This place looks different." "It's mine now," I said simply, pouring us both a glass. Ethan raised his glass in a toast. To taking control and kicking toxic people to the curb. I clinked my glass against his, a small smile playing at my lips. To fresh starts. As the night wore on, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Taking control of the apartment was only the beginning. I was ready to move forward, to build a life that was entirely my own. And as I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of good company and the quiet satisfaction of victory, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just reclaiming a space. I was reclaiming myself. The days following Vanessa's departure were a whirlwind of closure and clarity. For all her threats and dramatics, I knew Vanessa wasn't going to let things end quietly. True to form, she tried everything to claw her way back into control. Calls, emails, and even a few surprise visits to the apartment. Each one was a desperate attempt to salvage a situation she had already lost. Her tone alternated between pleading and accusatory. One day, she'd leave voicemails begging for another chance. "Lucas, we can fix this. It doesn't have to end this way. You know I didn't mean for things to get so messy." The next, her messages were filled with venom. "You're being petty, Lucas. I hope you're happy ruining my life." I didn't respond. Not once. The days of entertaining her manipulations were over. Every call, every message was just another reminder of why I was better off without her. Jordan's fallout with her had only made things worse. Apparently, He'd completely distanced himself after realizing the full extent of her lies and the legal mess she'd created. She was on her own now, and the isolation was clearly driving her to desperation. Chloe, ever the professional, kept me updated on the legal proceedings. "She's panicking," Chloe said during one of our calls. "The buyer isn't pressing charges, but they're furious. Vanessa's burned bridges she can't rebuild. And the divorce? She's got no leverage, Lucas. You're walking away clean." Hearing those words was like a weight being lifted off my chest. For years, I'd felt trapped in a marriage where I was constantly second-guessed, dismissed, and taken for granted. Now, with every legal step finalized, I could feel the chains breaking. When the divorce papers arrived for her signature, Vanessa made one last-ditch effort to stall. She sent a long email filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies, trying to paint herself as the victim. She claimed she had acted out of fear and felt neglected in our marriage. It was almost laughable. But the best part? Chloe's airtight preparation meant that Vanessa couldn't stall for long. A few weeks later, she finally signed the papers. Just like that, it was over. The day the divorce was finalized felt like the end of a long, grueling marathon. I stood in the middle of the apartment, my apartment, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The space felt lighter, freer, like it had been purged of all the negativity Vanessa had brought into it. That evening, Ethan came by again, this time with takeout and another bottle of bourbon. "So, it's official?" he asked, leaning back on the couch. "It's official," I said, pouring us each a glass. "To freedom," he said, raising his glass with a grin. "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The days that followed were filled with small victories. I continued reclaiming the apartment, turning it into a space that truly reflected who I was. The gaming setup Vanessa hated? Front and center in the living room. The artwork she called boring, proudly displayed on the walls. I even bought a new couch, one that felt like it belonged in my home, not ours. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to appease someone who never appreciated me. I was living for myself, and it felt damn good. One evening, as I was sorting through some old paperwork, I came across a photo of Vanessa and me. It was from the early days of our marriage, back when things still felt hopeful. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at the photo for a long moment. There had been good times, sure, but they were buried under years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. That photo was a snapshot of a moment that no longer existed, a life that had ended long before that phone call. I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. It wasn't something I wanted to see every day, but I wasn't ready to throw it away, either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me. The apartment had become more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of my resilience. I'd fought for it, stood my ground, and come out on top. It was a reminder that I was capable of reclaiming not just my space, but my life. In the weeks that followed, I started planning for the future. The divorce had closed one chapter, but it also opened the door to endless possibilities. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but I knew one thing for certain. It would be on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from Vanessa, free from her lies, and free from the weight of a marriage that had been dragging me down. As I sat on my newly purchased couch that night, a glass of bourbon in hand and the city lights twinkling outside, I couldn't help but smile. This was my life now. Simple, peaceful, and entirely mine. The weeks following the divorce felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare and realizing the sun was finally shining again. The legal battles were over, Vanessa was out of my life, and the apartment, my sanctuary, had become a symbol of everything I'd fought to reclaim. But what came next was the part one hadn't expected: peace. It was the kind of peace that came with knowing I'd survived something that could have broken me. I didn't just survive, though. I thrived. I rebuilt, one small step at a time, and each step brought me closer to a life that felt entirely my own. I started with the apartment. It wasn't just about redecorating. It was about turning the space into a reflection of who I was without Vanessa's influence. The oversized gaming chair I loved, but she loathed? It had a new home by the window, where I could sit and look out over the city while losing myself in a good game. The minimalist artwork she'd once dismissed as boring was back on the walls, and I even splurged on a new couch. A sleek, modern piece that fit perfectly with the new vibe of the place. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Each change I made felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. The apartment was no longer a shared space filled with compromise and resentment. It was mine, a sanctuary that radiated warmth, freedom, and possibility. One evening, as I was reorganizing a closet, I came across a box of old photos. Among them was one of Vanessa and me, taken during the early days of our marriage. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at the photo for a long moment. It was strange, seeing a version of myself that felt so far removed from who I was now. Back then, I thought I knew what love looked like, what partnership meant, but hindsight has a way of stripping away illusions. I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it into the back of the closet. It wasn't something I wanted to look at often, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. That part of my life, as painful as it had been, had shaped me. It wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about acknowledging it and letting it serve as a reminder of how far I'd come. With the apartment fully reclaimed, I turned my attention to the future. For years, I'd been so wrapped up in trying to hold my marriage together that I'd put my own dreams on hold. Now, with nothing holding me back, the possibilities felt endless. I started setting goals, personal, professional, even recreational. I signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never got around to. I reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during the years I spent walking on eggshells around Vanessa. Ethan, my best friend, was a constant presence through it all. One evening, we sat on the balcony with a bottle of bourbon, talking about everything and nothing. "You know," he said, raising his glass, "I've gotta say, man, you're glowing these days. Single life suits you." I laughed, taking a sip of my drink. "It's not about being single," I said. "It's about being free. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." "To freedom," Ethan said, clinking his glass against mine. "To freedom," I echoed, smiling. The divorce hadn't just ended my marriage. It had opened the door to a new chapter, one where I called the shots. The resentment, the self-doubt, the constant feeling of being trapped. They were all gone, replaced by a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. But the biggest change wasn't the apartment or my new hobbies. It was my mindset. I'd always thought of myself as someone who avoided confrontation, someone who kept the peace at all costs. But this experience had shown me that I was stronger than I ever realized. Vanessa had underestimated me. She thought she could bulldoze her way through my life, take everything, and leave me scrambling in the wreckage. But she was wrong. Her arrogance was her downfall, and my quiet resilience was my victory. One day, while scrolling through emails, I saw a message from her. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" I didn't even open it. Whatever she had to say, it didn't matter. My focus was forward, not back. Life didn't change overnight, but little by little, I built something new. The apartment became a haven, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The friendships I rekindled reminded me of the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly cared. And through it all, I learned to trust myself again. For years, I doubted my instincts, second-guessed every decision, and let someone else's needs overshadow my own. But now, I knew better. I knew what I deserved, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less. The night everything finally felt complete was quiet and unremarkable in the best way. I was sitting on my new couch, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights twinkle outside the window. The apartment was warm and inviting, a true reflection of me. I thought about everything Vanessa had said during that phone call, the arrogance, the condescension, the smug certainty that she'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. She thought she was walking away with everything, but in reality, she left with nothing. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life I never knew I could have, one filled with possibility, peace, and the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be. and for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free.